Welcome to the Unlicensed Podcast. This is our pilot episode. This podcast is dedicated to pulling back the proverbial curtain on what it means to have a vocation, a life, a journey, a career in mental health, what it means and what we have to do to make that difference, to be agents of change and agents of hope. I'm your host, Matthew Grimm, and I'm a new mental health therapist. So what does that mean? That means that within the last year, I completed a master's program. For me, it was my second. So I survived practicum. I jumped into the labyrinth of internship, and now I'm accumulating my hours towards that golden ticket that we all dream of, full licensure. Now, if you're listening to this, you're probably navigating a similar obstacle course, or you have some curiosities about the mental health field for one reason or another. I created this podcast because I want to pass on the resources that I was blessed to have fall into my lap while I was at university. I was paired with a doctoral student who went above and beyond to provide both solicited and unsolicited advice so that I knew when I stepped out of the education, out of academia, and into the real world, that I was going to know who I was as a counselor, what I needed to continue to do to be a counselor, and how I could be as successful as possible. Did she talk to me about theory? Yes. And are we going to talk about theory? Absolutely. But we're also going to talk about those real world aspects of being a therapist. We're going to discuss paperwork, supervision, imposter syndrome, and what is the real cost and sacrifice of a counseling education. I want this podcast to be your practical guide, your ethical sounding board. I want it to be a community in which we embrace the term unlicensed and don't see it as an obstacle and see it as a problem, but instead we use it as a label, as a symbol of a group who will consistently learn because we need to, so that we can provide hope, change, and safety to those that we want to help. So, why listen to me? What right do I have to tell you anything? I mean, where am I coming from? Those are all great questions. So, let's start at the beginning. Well, not the very, very beginning, because that would make this way too long. 1999, Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania. I'm graduating with my Bachelor of Arts degree from, you guessed it, Slippery Rock University. I have dreams, big dreams. I am going to go and take over. I am going to be the next big thing, because you see, my degree is in theater arts with a specialization in acting. And not only that, while in school I had fallen in love with the idea of directing. So not only do I have a degree where I get to pretend to be someone else, but I also want to tell other people what to do and how to shape and form a story for an audience. And in my mind, I am convinced that I'm going to go audition in the greater Pittsburgh area, which has a small to moderate sized theater community. I am going to get every role I audition for. I am going to get paid for all of these parts. I'm going to have theaters coming to me to direct their shows, and they're going to pay me. and I'm going to be able to use that to support myself. Boy, was I wrong. But I'm also thick-headed. I hit the roadblock that I wasn't getting a lot of roles because there were a lot of people way more experienced than I was. And when it came to directing, the first question I got was what experience I had. And directing in a university level was not what we were looking for, so I quickly pulled some friends together and we formed our own theater company with the thought process that this would give us the experience that was being asked of us so that we could build our resumes. Great thought, great dream. The problem is it costs money, and I didn't have any money. I was already living with my parents as it was, and I wanted out of there quick. And getting a job with manual labor, that's not really my specialty and never is gonna be my specialty. So I needed to find something that wasn't going to be too physically taxing due to some physical health issues that I deal with, but would bring in money and would give me the freedom to audition and rehearse and perform. And one day I was reading the newspaper looking for jobs, and there was an ad that simply said, "Do you want to make your own schedule? Do you like working with kids?" Well, this was the perfect job, or at least it seemed to me to be. It would let me do exactly what I want, create that schedule so I could feed that theater addiction. And plus, I'd be working with kids. I had tons of experience working with kids. So I walk into this interview having no clue what it is other than what the newspaper said, to find out that it's for something called a therapeutic support staff, or TSS. And I'd never heard of this in my life. All they told me was that the job would be working with children with mental health concerns in the homes, schools, and communities. This sounded great, except that I'd never had a psychology course before in my life. I'd had one sociology course in college. It would have helped if I had attended it. This is back in the late 90s, early 2000s. A lot of what was being presented to me wasn't in our popular lexicon, wasn't in pop culture, just wasn't well known. And people kept talking about this child has autism. This child is on the autism spectrum. I'd never heard the word autism. The only real thing that I can recall that talked about autism was Rain Man, and number one, that was with an adult, and number two, it was very obviously dramatized. So I'm walking into a job clearly having no clue what I'm getting myself into. The first child I met, I was taken to their home, and the home had a playroom set up to where therapists could go back in, and a door was shut behind you. And I walked in, and there's this child, young elementary school age, perched like a cross between a dog and a monkey on a Fisher-Price styled play school table, with his head weaving back and forth slowly through space, cooing, his eyes large, just taking in the space. And they stopped on me, and he just sort of took me in. Now, I had been told that this child didn't speak, that they were nonverbal, and that the goal was to introduce language. So, even though I knew that this child didn't speak, I wasn't the swiftest. I walked right out to this child, thrust my hand forward, and said, "Hello, how are you?" And this child looked at me from head to toe, smiled, and his head drew back and immediately came in contact with my forehead 4 sharp times as he headbutted me. I next remember seeing stars, a huge smile on his face, and the thoughts of this is gonna be fun. I wasn't angry at the kid. I wasn't afraid of him. I wasn't even mad because it didn't come across that this child had done anything out of anger or malicious. This was just his way of saying, "Hi, nice to meet you." And that began my foray or introducing myself to the world of autism spectrum disorder. And for the next 2.5 years, I worked with a variety of children of different ages, but the majority of them were on that spectrum. And I was fascinated because I was going into homes and families were absolutely thrilled to have you coming into their home. So you either got treated as part of the family or you were a worker, one or the other. But there weren't a lot of trainings and discussions on ethics and on therapeutic boundaries at that point in time. It was just assumed that you knew this type of thing. And again, my degree being in something very different, I didn't. So I very quickly got attached to a lot of these children and a lot of families. And I put my all into everything that I did. And I used my theatricality, my musical ability, my ability to work with children on top of everything that I was being taught to bring about positive changes to their lives. As this happened, I ended up getting burnt out because, of course, I'm putting everything in there. I finally stepped back and took about 6 months away, did some volunteer work at a nursing home. While I was there, there was another gentleman who was bringing in an adult with some special needs in, and I found out that individual had an intellectual developmental disability plus complex mental health concerns and trauma, and that the company this man worked for specialized in working with children and adults with an intellectual developmental disability, complex mental health, and trauma. And that seemed really intriguing to me. Thought, wow, maybe this is the next step. I got the company's contact information, made a few calls, did an interview, and I got hired onto their home and community habilitation team, which meant, again, I was going to be doing some TSS work as I did before, but I was also going to be working with adults doing a very similar position, only there was no master's level clinician. It was all looking at the IDD side of things, the trauma, and the complex mental health issues. Going into those homes, communities, and schools, and now with adults, even employment. This was just fantastic. I moved up through the ranks, and the way that our department was set up was that we had an executive director who ran the entire agency, and then each department had a director. So we had a director of home and community habilitation services. Then we had a coordinator of programmatic and a coordinator of clinical. And then under those two were our team leads. And I'd become a team lead under the programmatic coordinator. That a lot of that was because number one, a lot of those families wanted a male. A lot of my talents as a stage manager and director could come out because a lot of the staffing there required a lot of switches and thinking on your feet, where on the clinical side it was much more set in stone, and if that therapist didn't show up, a lot of times the family didn't want that replacement. But I kept sitting back and watching what those above me were doing, especially the clinicians, the behavior specialists, and being trained by them at certain times, and thinking how much I would love to be a behavior specialist. But the again, I was making the most money I'd ever made before. I was able from time to time to sneak away, engage in my theater pursuits, though not as much as I'd hoped. Our executive director had a talent for reimagining how the agency would be run, and he would restructure us from time to time. And the last restructuring that he did, he basically gave each team lead the choice of where they would go, which department they would work under, programmatic or clinical. And I was the only one that said that I wanted to do both. And being senior man in, it was something that was permitted. And after doing both for a while, I was becoming more and more and more interested in these behavior specialists and the idea of writing a plan and having an understanding of why you might use a certain intervention. And so I went to our director and asked permission if I could talk to the clinical coordinator about being trained as a behavior specialist. With the director's blessing, I went to my direct supervisor and got her blessing. And I can remember walking into the clinical coordinator's office and explaining that I had talked to those two other people who weren't only mentors but friends of ours, and finally saying that, I want to be a behavior specialist. Can I? Will you train me? And her response was very pure and very simple. I've been waiting. I worked on the clinical side for several years under various master's level clinicians because the state said I had to do that with only having a bachelor's. But then the state began to make some changes in their policies, and I got concerned that they would make some changes that would mean that I wouldn't be able to do a position that I had fallen in love with any longer. So I began talking about going and getting a master's degree. Now, all of my supervisors had basically said that what I feared was never going to happen, not to worry about it, but it really nagged at me. And one day I spoke with my partner and just decided to jump with both feet and sign myself up for a master's degree program. This was both a wonderful thing and a horrible mistake. In 2 years, I completed a master's in mental health and wellness with a specialization in community mental health. And my thought process was, okay, I have this degree now. Now I have a fallback. I will definitely be able to maintain being a behavior specialist. But if I want to go and get licensed by the state to become a real therapist, I'll be able to do that now. I've got my safety net. But there was no reason to do that. Move forward a few years, and we have this thing called a pandemic that shuts the world down. And I think, well, I am shut down. I can't do anything. This would be the time to go and get licensed, only to find out that the degree that I have is not a clinical degree and could not be used towards licensure. To say that I was angry would be an understatement, but I was also determined. So this time I reached out to a family friend who is a psychologist in the local area, and I asked for advice. I explained what had happened, where I wanted to go, and asked what I should do. And this gentleman gave me the best advice in the whole world, told me which universities were looking for students, how I needed to go at them to not only get into their program, but use parts of my degree to get transferred over so I wouldn't have to pay for a full degree. And you would think, what sane person during a pandemic where your job is shut down goes and signs up for a second master's degree? I never said I was a sane person, but I jumped right in and into a master's degree program in clinical mental health counseling. Quickly learned that while I had that academic experience, that didn't equal the clinical experience that I thought I had, and that the toughest parts of this degree weren't the research papers. I could write those. It was breaking down cases that nearly drove me crazy because I could say what I was going to do, but I couldn't explain the why. I just knew to do it. It came naturally to me. So I was really struggling putting the pieces together. And it was finding a practicum site that was stressful, and then starting there and going from a world where I had always had someone else as a backup. As a TSS, there was a family member always present. As home and community rehabilitation, there was either someone else present or someone else on call that I could pick up the phone and call. But in the world of practicum and in the world of internship, that's not how it is. I walked into a room that I called my office, and all of a sudden, I have a client sitting across from me. That whole institutionalized setting is gone. I had all the theory in the world, but I didn't know how to handle the silence of the room. I didn't know how to respond when my client cried. What was most surprising was the realization that my client's real life issues were their homelessness, their unemployment, things that were never ever covered in our perfectly sanitized textbooks. And I realized that the classroom prepared me to take an ethics exam, prepared me to take a state exam, but it did not in any way prepare me for the humanity and the chaos of the therapy room. My biggest discovery, and what I want this podcast to teach you, is that the journey from student to competent clinician is paved with uncertainty, and that is normal. This show is a space for that honest conversation, the one I hope to have in supervision, but rarely outside of it, and I hope you're having it. It's about accepting that we are, and always will be, unlicensed, in the sense that we are constantly learning and evolving. When we look at the vocation of a counselor or a therapist, we see that it can come from a creative space, an analytical space, or somewhere in between. But the one thing the job requires is new resources. So let's look at this podcast as a new resource. I believe every therapist needs help in three key areas that the traditional classroom either skips or just glosses over. Number one, the documentation dread. We spend zero time in school learning about an EHR system, billing codes, CPT codes, and very little time writing notes that justify medical necessity to insurance payers. We're going to dedicate an episode or episodes to turning documentation from a chore into your legal and ethical shield. Number two, the ethical tightrope beyond the textbook. Ethics classes give you the model. But what about the real world gray areas? Those times when do I make that CYS call or don't I? My client wants to be friends on social media. I've got a colleague that I'm aware of, they're burning out. We need space to discuss these real, messy choices that don't always have a clean answer. Number 3, the imposter trap, the emotional cost. Imposter syndrome is rampant in this field. We'll provide specific actionable tools to manage anxiety in the session room, effectively use supervision, and understand that feeling overwhelmed is evidence of professional care, not incompetence. Now let's talk about, for a moment, the supervisor relationship. And I've talked about one supervisor who's been in my life that inspired this podcast. But I have had so many others that have been mentors, supervisors, friends, family. I've had some supervisors who I don't know where I would be without, and some whom, quite honestly, I could have supervised. But that's neither here nor there. The one big thing that I have learned that has been passed down from supervisor to supervisor to supervisor to supervisor is that eternal need to have that work-life balance, to know when it's time to let things go. And how do I do that? How do you do that? Well, number 1, listen to your body. Trust in what it's trying to tell you and go with it. Number 2, don't be afraid to ask for help. I think too many people think if I ask for help, I appear weak or it puts my job at jeopardy. Absolutely not. Consult with your supervisor, consult with colleagues, consult with other professionals. Often what we are thinking is absolutely correct, and we just need to hear someone else say it to have a little bit more confidence. Number 3, be as honest and transparent as professionally possible with those that you support. So what do I mean by that? For those of you who are in that practicum and internship in community mental health, you are going to have someone, I absolute guarantee you, walk into your office and say something like, well, you're the 13th counselor I've seen here. How long are you going to be here? Being as honest in that moment, making a plan for that person so that they realize that yes, you are there for a finite period of time, and once that period of time is done, you may not be there, but that you'll be open to them, you'll let them know when you're going, and that you will do everything in your power to be there to transition them to their next therapist, does so much. It makes that person feel so safe. And that's number 4. Building a relationship of safety, trust, and empathy with those that we support. We need to learn to listen to the feelings behind our words. Now, this is just the beginning of our work together. In the next few weeks, we're going to be covering things such as mastering the therapeutic alliance, the imposter syndrome, and we're going to pull back the curtain on community mental health, group practices, and private practices, just to name a few. So what I need from you, here's my call to action. Hit that subscribe button. That's the single most helpful thing you can do to support the show. It ensures that you'll get our next episode, Mastering the Therapeutic Alliance. Share the episode. Do you have a colleague who is struggling in their internship, or a friend who's thinking of going back to school, someone who has an interest in counseling, be it as a client or a therapist, send them this link. Let's build a supportive community. As we're closing out our pilot episode, I want to leave you with this thought. The pursuit of becoming a therapist is a marathon, not a sprint. It is challenging, but it is deeply rewarding. Remember, we'll always be unlicensed as long as we're constantly learning. Thank you for trusting me with your time. We'll talk again next week.